The organ swelled, a triumphant sound meant to fill the cavernous cathedral with the promise of a dynasty solidified. Damon Blackwood stood at the altar, a statue carved from wealth and ambition. The tuxedo, custom-made in Milan, felt like a straitjacket. Beside him, his best man, a fellow titan of industry, shifted his weight, the only sign of impatience in their perfectly curated world. Damon's gaze swept over the assembled guests. A sea of power, influence, and old money, all here to witness the union of Blackwood Capital and Vance Holdings, personified in his marriage to Isabella Vance. It was not a merger of hearts, but a strategic alliance of empires, and today was the closing ceremony. His focus, even now, was on the call he'd taken just before walking down the aisle, a hostile takeover bid in Asia that required his ruthless precision. His life was a series of transactions, and this wedding was the most significant one to date. He felt nothing. A cold, hollow space resided where emotion was supposed to live. He had long ago accepted this vacancy as the price of his success. His fiancée, Isabella, was making her way down the aisle, a vision in white, her smile as calculated and brilliant as a flawless diamond. She was perfect for him, a woman who understood that love was a liability and legacy was everything. He was a king in his cold, glittering castle, and she was the queen who would help him defend its walls. He prepared to put on the smile that the photographers and investors expected, a mask of serene contentment. Then the great oak doors at the back of the cathedral groaned open, cutting through the music with a discordant screech. A collective gasp rippled through the pews. It was not a late-arriving guest. A woman stood silhouetted against the bright afternoon light, her form slender and defiant. She was not dressed in the finery of their world. She wore simple, worn jeans and a faded cotton shirt. But it was not her that held Damon's attention, that made the air freeze in his lungs. It was the two children standing on either side of her, their small hands clutching hers. A boy and a girl. Twins. They stepped forward into the light of the stained glass windows, and the world tilted on its axis. The boy had his hair, the same unruly dark waves that no amount of expensive product could ever truly tame. The girl had his eyes, a startling, intense shade of storm gray that everyone said was the unmistakable mark of a Blackwood. They were mirror images of him, small, perfect echoes of a man he once was, before the world had carved him into this cold effigy. The girl was holding up a small, silver locket, dangling it from a chain as if it were a sacred artifact. The woman leading them finally looked up, her gaze cutting across the hundreds of feet of marble and velvet to find his. Time collapsed. 15 years vanished in an instant. It was Alara. The woman he had loved with a fierce, desperate passion he had since buried under layers of steel and cynicism. The woman he had destroyed. The woman from a world of sunlight and struggle whom he had cast out of his life with words so cruel they still echoed in the loneliest hours of the night. The music had long since died. The cathedral was wrapped in a suffocating silence, broken only by the sound of small footsteps on ancient stone. As they drew closer, the little girl's voice, clear and unafraid, rang out, reaching the altar with horrifying clarity. "Mama said we would find him here," she announced to the silent crowd. Then, her gray eyes, his gray eyes, locked onto his, and she spoke the words that shattered his perfectly constructed universe into a million irreparable pieces. "Daddy? It's you." Damon felt the world dissolve. The face of his best man was a blur of confusion. Isabella, halfway down the aisle, had frozen, her perfect smile twisting into a mask of pure fury. The whispers started, a venomous hiss spreading through the pews like wildfire. But he heard none of it. He saw only the children, his children. The locket the little girl held now seemed to burn with a light of its own, and he knew, with a certainty that defied all logic, that it contained the photograph he had given Alara on the last good day they ever had together. He had told her she could never be a mother, that she was too poor, too fragile, too unsuited for the world he was destined to command. And here she was, having crashed his life's most important transaction, presenting him with his own living, breathing legacy, a legacy he had thrown away. His gloved hand, the one meant to receive Isabella's, trembled and fell to his side. The phone in his pocket, buzzing with the urgent demands of his Asian acquisition, went completely ignored. It was just a toy from another life. His world, the real one, had just walked back in. The penthouse was a cage of glass and steel, suspended 50 stories above the city that Damon Blackwood owned. But tonight, the sprawling panorama of glittering lights offered no comfort, no sense of power. It was merely a reminder of the vast, empty distance between himself and the life he should have had. The fallout from the wedding had been swift and brutal. Isabella had retreated with her family, issuing a terse no comment through a phalanx of lawyers. The guests had scattered like startled birds, their whispers and speculations already forming the bedrock of the biggest scandal of the decade. Damon had said nothing. He had simply turned and walked away from the altar, from his future, from everything, and retreated here to his silent sanctuary. He walked over to a polished mahogany chest in the corner of his study, a piece of furniture he hadn't opened in over a decade. His hands, usually so steady during multi-billion-dollar negotiations, fumbled with the latch. Inside was a small, unassuming cardboard box, a relic from a past he had tried to surgically remove from his memory. He lifted the lid. On top lay a photograph, its corners soft with age. It was him and Alara, 20 years old, sitting on the hood of his beat-up college car. He was laughing, a genuine, unburdened laugh he hadn't produced since. She was looking at him, her face alight with a love so pure it was painful to behold. Beneath the photo was a pressed daisy, faded and fragile, from a picnic in a field of wildflowers. And under that, a simple silver ring, not a fine make, but bought with the last $20 he had from a part-time job. He remembered slipping it onto her finger, promising her a future that he had later ripped away with both hands. His cruelty came rushing back to him, a toxic tide of shame. He had been so young, so terrified of his father's disapproval, so desperate to prove he was worthy of the Blackwood name. Alara, with her gentle heart and humble origins, had been a threat to that ambition. His family, led by his older sister Victoria, had made their disdain clear. Victoria, who had always viewed his life as an extension of the family's corporate strategy, had warned him that Alara would be his ruin. The final fight played out in his mind with searing clarity. It had been in his small apartment, the one he had before the inheritance kicked in. He had just received an ultimatum from his father. It was Alara or the Empire. He chose the Empire. "You don't understand the world I live in," he had spat at her, his words laced with the poison of his own fear. She had stood her ground, her eyes flashing with hurt and defiance. "The world I live in has love, Damon. What does yours have?" The final, unforgivable blow came when she spoke of their future, of a family. "A mother," he had sneered, the words tasting like ash. "You have nothing. You could never give a child what they need. You would be a terrible mother." He had watched her spirit break, watched the light in her eyes die, and he had done nothing. She had left that night, and he had let her go. A sharp, furious rapping on his front door broke the spell. It was Isabella, her wedding dress swapped for a silk pantsuit that was as sharp and unforgiving as her expression. "Damon, what are you doing hiding in here?" she demanded, storming past him. Her eyes were cold, her face a mask of controlled rage. "The board is calling. My father is apoplectic. You need to get out in front of this. You need to issue a statement. You need to denounce that woman and her fraudulent claims. You need to fix this disgusting mess." Her words were a drumbeat of their shared reality: image, control, damage, limitation. She saw the scene at the church not as a human tragedy but as a public relations crisis. She gestured wildly around the penthouse. "This is our life, Damon. The one we built. Are you going to let some tramp from your past burn it all to the ground with a couple of rented children?" The accusation hung in the air, ugly and vile. He looked at her, at this perfect, polished woman who was his partner in ambition, and he felt a chasm open between them. He turned away from her, walking to the massive window and pulling his phone from his pocket. He ignored the dozens of missed calls from his board members and his sister. He dialed a single number. "Marcus," he said, his voice low and steady, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside him. Marcus Thorne was his head of security, a man of absolute discretion and formidable competence. "I have a job for you. It's the most important one I will ever give you." "Anything, Mr. Blackwood," came the calm reply. "A woman named Alara Jensen. She was at my wedding today, with 2 children. Twins, a boy and a girl, around 14 or 15 years old." Damon's voice was tight, precise. "I want to know everything. Where has she been for the last 15 years? Where does she live? What does she do? Who are those children? I want birth certificates, school records, medical files. Everything." And Marcus, he paused, the weight of the next words pressing down on him. "I want it done with absolute discretion. No one, not my sister, not my fiancé, no one is to know you are doing this. I want the truth. And I want it by morning." He hung up the phone, ignoring Isabella's stunned, furious glare. The first step was to know. The second would be to act. Hours later, as the first gray light of dawn broke over the city, Marcus arrived. He looked grim. He carried a single, sealed manila envelope. There were complications, sir, Marcus said, his professional composure strained. Damon took the envelope, his hands steady now, fueled by a cold dread. He ripped it open. Inside were a few documents. The first was a preliminary background check on Alara. It showed a fractured history, a series of low-paying jobs, multiple addresses in the poorest parts of the city. Then he saw the next document. It was a copy of a hospital admission form, dated 15 years ago, just 2 weeks after their breakup. The reason for admission: severe trauma from a single-vehicle car accident. Damon's blood ran cold. He scanned the page, his eyes devouring the text. Alara had been in a coma for nearly a year. His heart hammered against his ribs. She had been alone, broken in a hospital bed while he was closing his first major deal, celebrating the beginning of his ascent. The final page was a summary from the hospital records, a discharge report. He read the line twice, then a third time, the words refusing to make sense. Patient was pregnant upon admission. The pregnancy was non-viable. Fetal demise confirmed post-trauma. He looked up at Marcus, his face a mask of disbelief. It says she lost the babies. The official record says that, yes, Marcus confirmed, his tone grave. But sir, I also got this. He handed Damon a small, grainy photograph, a printout from a city database. It was a school picture of the twins, Leo and Luna Jensen. Their date of birth was listed clearly at the bottom of the page. It was 9 months after he and Alara had last been together. The records were falsified, Mr. Blackwood, Marcus said quietly. Someone went to a great deal of trouble to make it look like your children never existed. The first hint of the conspiracy had surfaced, dark and monstrous. Someone hadn't just wanted Alara gone, they had wanted to erase her legacy and his from the face of the earth. The address Marcus had provided led Damon to a part of the city he typically only saw from his helicopter, a grid of crumbling brick tenements, graffiti-scarred walls, and streets lined with weary, beaten-down cars. He had traded his Bentley for a nondescript sedan from his security pool, his tailored suit for jeans, and a plain gray pullover. He was not Damon Blackwood, CEO here. He was an intruder, a ghost from another world. He found their building, a 4-story walk-up with rust-stained fire escapes and cracked windows. He parked across the street, his hands gripping the steering wheel, and simply watched. After an hour, they emerged. Alara, her face etched with a familiar mixture of resilience and exhaustion, was holding each of their hands. The twins, Leo and Luna, were dressed in clean but faded school uniforms. Leo's backpack was patched with duct tape. Luna's shoes looked a size too small. They walked to a bus stop at the corner. Damon's chest constricted with a pain so sharp it stole his breath. He lived in a world where $1 million was a rounding error, where his biggest hardship was a delayed private jet. He had just tried to spend $500,000 on flowers for a wedding that was a lie, and his children were wearing second-hand shoes. The guilt was a physical thing, a crushing weight that settled deep in his bones. He watched them get on the crowded city bus, and the image seared itself into his memory. The stark, brutal contrast between their lives and his was a judgment. The cruel words he had thrown at Alara 15 years ago, "You have nothing," mocked him. She had nothing? She had everything. She had raised 2 remarkable children on her own against odds he couldn't begin to fathom, while he had been accumulating wealth that now felt like a pile of meaningless, toxic dust. He knew then that simply writing a check would be an insult. It wouldn't fix this. He had to do more. He had to understand. He had to earn his way back into a life he had so casually discarded. He waited until they returned from school that afternoon. He saw their old, battered station wagon parked near the entrance to their building, its hood propped open with a stick. It was his chance, a flimsy excuse, but an excuse nonetheless. He got out of his car and approached, his heart pounding a nervous rhythm against his ribs. He had faced down hostile boards and ruthless competitors without flinching, yet the prospect of speaking to her, to them, terrified him. He walked up to the car just as Alara and the kids were trying to get their groceries out of the back. "Looks like you've got some engine trouble," he said, his voice sounding foreign and strained to his own ears. Alara spun around, her eyes widening in shock and then narrowing with suspicion. She instinctively pulled the children behind her, a lioness shielding her cubs. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice low and fierce. I know a little about cars," he stammered, feeling like a fool. From a long time ago, I thought maybe I could help. It was true. Before the inheritance, before the empire, he had spent a summer working in a garage to anger his father. It was the only honest work he'd ever done. She stared at him, her face a war of conflicting emotions. He could see the anger, the deep, abiding hurt, but also a flicker of exhaustion. A single mother with a broken car and 2 kids to feed didn't have the luxury of pride. Leo peeked out from behind her, his expression hostile and protective. He looked just like Damon had at that age, already carrying the weight of the world on his small shoulders. But Luna, the girl with his eyes, stepped forward, her curiosity overriding her caution. She looked at the greasy engine, then back at Damon. "Can you really fix it?" she asked, her voice small but clear. He nodded, grateful for the opening. "I can try." Elara hesitated for a long moment, then gave a short, reluctant nod. "Fine. But don't expect a thank you." She stood back, her arms crossed, watching his every move with an eagle eye. Damon took off the expensive watch he was still wearing, placing it carefully on the sidewalk, and leaned into the engine bay. It was a mess of old wires and grime, but the problem was simple: a loose alternator belt. As he worked, tightening a bolt here, adjusting a wire there, he was acutely aware of the 2 children watching him. Leo remained silent and wary, a sentinel guarding his family. Luna, however, crept closer. She sat on the curb, her chin resting in her hands, and studied him with an unnerving intensity. He could feel her gaze on his face, his hands, his every movement. He finally got the belt tightened and was wiping his greasy hands on a rag he'd found in his trunk when she spoke. "You have sad eyes," she said, her tone matter-of-fact, not sympathetic. He froze, his hand halfway to his face. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw a wisdom there that no child should possess. "Do I?" he asked quietly. She nodded, her expression serious. "Yes. They're just like the eyes in Mama's locket." The world stopped. The sounds of the city, the distant sirens, the rumble of traffic faded into nothing. He looked from Luna's earnest face to Elara, who had gone completely still, her face ashen. Her hand instinctively went to her neck, where a thin silver chain was tucked beneath the collar of her shirt. Leo's eyes darted from Damon to his mother and back again, a flicker of dawning comprehension on his face. The locket. The one she had clutched at the wedding. The one with his picture inside. His pathetic, clumsy attempt to enter their world under a false pretense had just been blown apart by the simple, devastating honesty of a child. He was not a helpful stranger. He was the man with the sad eyes from the locket, the ghost who had haunted their lives from a distance, and he had been caught. The silence that followed was heavier and more damning than any accusation she could have ever leveled at him. The next morning, the city awoke to screaming headlines. A prominent tabloid, known for its viciousness, had the story. "Jilted Groom's Gold Digger Nightmare, EX Flame Hires Actors to Fake Air Plot." The article was a masterpiece of character assassination. It painted Elara as a conniving, desperate woman who had orchestrated the entire wedding fiasco. It quoted anonymous friends of Isabella Vance who described Elara as a known grifter from Damon's youth. The most poisonous part was the insinuation that the children were not his, but rented props in a cruel scheme to extort millions from the heartbroken Blackwood family. Damon stared at the paper, a cold, lethal rage building inside him. This was not random gossip. This was a targeted attack. This was Isabella's handiwork. His fury propelled him into action. He called Marcus. "Forget discretion," he ordered, his voice like ice. "I want to know who paid that hospital administrator 15 years ago. I want account numbers, transaction records, shell corporations. I want the source of the money. Use any resource you need. Burn favors. Pay whatever it takes. I want the proof." He knew Isabella wasn't the mastermind. She lacked the cold, long-term strategic thinking for something this elaborate. This was older. Deeper. While Marcus and his team of forensic accountants began to tear apart 15-year-old financial data, Damon knew he had to see Elara. He drove back to her neighborhood, the slanderous newspaper on the passenger seat like a toxic passenger. He found her just as she was leaving her apartment, her face pale and drawn. She was holding a copy of the same paper, her knuckles white. When she saw him, her expression wasn't angry, it was defeated. "Is this you?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Is this your way of fighting back?" "No," he said, the word raw. "Elara, I swear to you, this wasn't me. This was Isabella. She's trying to destroy you to save her own reputation." He stepped closer, his hands held up in a gesture of peace. "I came to apologize. And I came to show you something." He pulled out the document Marcus had found, the falsified hospital report stating her babies had died. He handed it to her. She stared at it, her brow furrowing in confusion. I don't understand. I was in a coma. When I woke up, they told me I'd lost them. They said the trauma of the accident was too much. Her voice cracked, the memory of that unimaginable pain still fresh. It was a lie, Elara, he said gently. Someone paid a doctor, a hospital administrator, to create this record. To make you believe they were gone. To make sure if I ever came looking, I would believe it too. He watched her absorb the information, watched her confusion slowly morph into horrified understanding. The lie she had been forced to live with was even crueler than she had ever imagined. But who would do that? Why, she whispered, sinking onto the steps of her building. I don't know yet, he admitted. But I am going to find out. And I am going to make them pay. He looked at her, this woman who had endured so much, and for the first time he didn't see the past. He saw a potential ally. I can't do this alone. I need you. I need to know everything that happened after you left. Every detail. It might seem small, but it could be the key. She looked from the forged document in her hands to his face, searching for the truth. She saw the rage in his eyes, the guilt, but also a new, ironclad determination. She had spent 15 years fighting for her children on her own. Now, the man who had caused her initial pain was offering to help her fight the faceless enemy who had compounded it. With a slow, hesitant nod, she agreed. An uneasy alliance was formed, born from betrayal and a shared need for justice. The first domino fell 2 days later. Marcus's team had found it, a wire transfer for $250,000 sent to the personal account of the hospital administrator the day after Elara's falsified records were filed. The money came from a shell corporation based in the Cayman Islands, a company that was, after peeling back 3 layers of legal obfuscation, a subsidiary of Blackwood Enterprises. The enemy was inside his own house. But as they were piecing together the financial trail, Isabella made her next, most desperate move. Elara received a knock on her door. It was a stern-faced woman from Child Protective Services. They had received an anonymous tip, she explained, alleging child neglect, an unsafe living environment, and an unstable parent. They were there to conduct an emergency assessment. Elara called Damon in a panic. The threat was no longer to her reputation, it was a direct, legal assault on her family. This was an attempt to take Leo and Luna away from her. Damon's rage turned into something cold and crystalline. This was escalation. This was war. The game had changed and the stakes were now impossibly high. He had to end this and he had to end it now. He knew who he had to face first. He had the proof in his hand and he was going to use it like a weapon. The penthouse, once a symbol of his and Isabella's shared ambition, now felt like a tomb. He had summoned her there, his voice on the phone leaving no room for argument. She arrived looking flawless and defiant, a warrior ready for battle. She found him standing by the window, not looking at the view, but at a stack of papers on the marble coffee table. What is this, Damon? She asked, her tone brittle. Another dramatic gesture? Are you going to grovel and ask me to take you back? He turned slowly, his face devoid of all emotion. There will be no more groveling, he said, his voice flat and dangerous. There will only be the truth, he gestured to the papers. This is a wire transfer confirmation for $250,000, paid 15 years ago to a man named Dr. Alistair Finch. He was the administrator at the hospital where Elara was treated after her accident. He was the man who signed the report saying our children were dead. Isabella's composure flickered for just a second. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you? Damon's voice dropped lower. The money came from a shell company owned by Blackwood Enterprises. And this, he added, sliding another paper across the table, is a phone record from yesterday. An anonymous call made from a burner phone purchased with your credit card to Child Protective Services, making false allegations against Elara Jensen. He let the evidence sit between them, cold and irrefutable. The game is over, Isabella. Cornered, the polished veneer finally cracked, revealing the ugly reality beneath. A sneer twisted her perfect lips. So you found out. What are you going to do, Damon? Run to the police? You think I'm afraid of you? She laughed, a harsh, grating sound. I did it for us. I did it to protect you. Protect me, he scoffed, the words tasting like poison. By trying to have my children taken from their mother? By leaking lies to the press. That woman is a weed, Damon, she spat, her voice rising with venom. She was going to choke everything we've built. I had to cut her out. And I wasn't the one who started it. I was just finishing what your family began all those years ago. The confession hung in the air, but it was the implication that struck him like a physical blow. What do you mean, What my family began? He asked, his blood running cold. Isabella's eyes glittered with malicious triumph. She knew she was defeated, but she was going to take him down with her. Oh, you poor, blind fool. You think this was all about me? I'm just an amateur. The real artist, the true mastermind, was your sister. The name hit him harder than any of the evidence. Victoria? Yes, Victoria, she crowed. Your loyal, protective older sister. She was the one who found out Alara was pregnant all those years ago. She was the one who saw the threat to the Blackwood legacy, to your inheritance, to the perfect path she had laid out for you. She orchestrated everything. She had someone run Alara off the road. Gently, of course, just enough to cause a scare. The coma was an unexpected bonus. She paid the doctor, created the shell company, buried the truth so deep she thought no one would ever find it. All to protect you from your own mistakes. I just learned from the best. The world tilted, the floor seeming to drop out from under him. His own sister, the one who had mentored him, who had helped him build his empire, had committed a monstrous betrayal that had shaped the entire course of his life. She hadn't just disapproved of Alara, she had tried to erase her and his children from existence. The cold, hollow space inside him, the one he had lived with for 15 years, was suddenly filled with a white-hot, cleansing rage. He looked at Isabella, but he no longer saw her. He saw the embodiment of a corrupt, poisonous world he had allowed to define him. He picked up his phone. With deliberate, calm movements, he called his head of security. Marcus, have Mr. Vance's daughter escorted from the premises. Her access to all my properties is terminated, effective immediately. He then dialed his publicist. David, issue a statement. The engagement is off. Irreconcilable differences. He hung up and looked at Isabella's stunned face. Our future is over, he said, his voice as cold as a grave. You can see yourself out. As she was led away, sputtering threats and promises of ruin, Damon made one more call. His fingers felt like lead as he dialed the number. Victoria, he said when she answered, her voice crisp and businesslike as always. Damon, I was just about to call you. This situation has gotten completely out of. I know, he cut her off, the two words landing with the finality of a death sentence. I know everything. A stunned silence met him from the other end of the line. He didn't need to say more. It's over. He hung up the phone and walked out of the penthouse without a backward glance, leaving the wreckage of his old life behind. He drove straight to Alara's apartment, his purpose singular and absolute. He found her pacing in her small living room, the CPS notice clutched in her hand. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He stood before her, the mother of his children, the woman his family had tried to destroy, and he laid the full, ugly truth bare. He told her everything. About Victoria's deep, calculated betrayal. About the arranged accident. About the money, the lies, the conspiracy that spanned 15 years, all designed to keep them apart. He watched her face as she processed the sheer scale of the cruelty inflicted upon her. When he was finished, the room was silent. I let this happen, he said, his voice thick with a guilt that was now his constant companion. My ambition, my weakness, my family. I let them do this to you. To our children. He looked her in the eye, and for the first time he let her see all the way into his broken soul. But I am making you a promise, right here, right now. I will not let them harm you or Leo or Luna ever again. I will protect you with every resource I have, with my entire fortune, with my life if I have to. I will dedicate myself to undoing the damage they have caused. I will earn back the right to be in their lives. I will earn back the right to stand by your side. It was not a plea. It was a vow. A solemn, unbreakable commitment. The battle lines were drawn, and he had finally, irrevocably, chosen his side. Victoria Blackwood was not a woman who accepted defeat. She was a creature of power, and when cornered, she attacked. 2 days after Damon's call, she made her move. She convened an emergency meeting of the board of directors of Blackwood Enterprises. The stated purpose on the agenda was blunt, to vote on the immediate removal of Damon Blackwood as chief executive officer, citing Section 7 of the corporate bylaws regarding behavior that jeopardizes the company's stability and reputation. She had leaked the time and place to the financial press, turning the boardroom into a public arena for his execution. She planned to use the scandal of the wedding, his erratic behavior, and his sudden obsession with a woman of questionable character as evidence of his mental unfitness to lead. It was a classic, ruthless corporate coup, and she was poised to deliver the killing blow. The boardroom was a theater of tension. The long mahogany table was surrounded by the stony faces of the board members, men and women who had known Damon for years but whose loyalty was ultimately to the bottom line. At the head of the table, Victoria stood, the picture of calm, controlled authority. She was dressed in a severe black suit, her expression one of grave concern. The air crackled with anticipation and the quiet clicks of cameras from the press section at the back of the room. Damon entered the room just as she was about to begin. He didn't take his seat. He stood near the door, a silent, imposing figure. He looked not at the board, but at his sister. Victoria met his gaze, her eyes cold and unwavering. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod to the chairman and began her address. "Members of the board, esteemed colleagues," she started, her voice resonating with practiced sincerity. "It is with the heaviest of hearts that I have called this meeting. We are all aware of the recent disruptions in my brother's personal life. While we have always supported him, his recent actions have shown a disturbing lack of judgment that now poses a direct threat to the stability and future of this great company. His erratic behavior, his sudden and alarming fixation, it forces us to ask the difficult question of whether he is still fit to command." She spoke eloquently, weaving a narrative of a brilliant man who had lost his way, a tragic hero who needed to be saved from himself for the good of the empire he had helped build. She was painting a picture for the board, for the press, for the world. Just as she was about to formally call for the vote that would strip him of his title and power, Damon moved. "Before you vote," he said, his voice cutting through the room, calm and powerful. "There is something you all need to see." He walked to the front of the room, past his stunned sister, and nodded to Marcus, who was waiting discreetly by the presentation equipment. The large screen behind the chairman's seat, which was meant to display quarterly earnings, flickered to life. It did not show corporate data. It showed a bank statement. The wire transfer. $250,000 from a Blackwood subsidiary to Dr. Alastair Finch. A gasp went through the room. "This," Damon announced, "is the price my sister paid to have my children declared dead 15 years ago." Victoria's face went white. "This is absurd. A fabrication," she stammered, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. "Is it?" Damon asked coolly. "Perhaps this will provide some context." He nodded to Marcus again. The screen went blank and then a sound filled the room. An audio file. It was Isabella's voice, sharp and furious, recorded in the penthouse 2 days prior. "The real artist, the true mastermind, was your sister," the voice shrieked from the speakers. "She was the one who found out Alara was pregnant. She orchestrated everything. The accident, paying the doctor, all to protect you." A collective, horrified silence descended upon the boardroom. The recording played on, an unvarnished confession that laid bare the entire conspiracy. The board members stared at Victoria, their expressions shifting from skepticism to shock, then to utter disgust. The reporters in the back were scribbling furiously, their faces alight with the story of a lifetime. Victoria stood frozen, exposed, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her in real time. The power she had wielded for so long had evaporated in the space of 30 seconds. Before anyone could even react, the main doors of the boardroom swung open. It wasn't company security. 2 men and a woman in dark suits with federal badges clipped to their belts entered the room with quiet, purposeful authority. They walked directly toward the head of the table. "Victoria Blackwood," the lead agent asked, his voice calm but absolute. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, wire fraud, and kidnapping." The last word hung in the air, a stunning indictment of her crime. "For what else do you call stealing a man's children for 15 years? As the agents cuffed a speechless, trembling Victoria, her face a mask of disbelief and ruin, the press erupted into a frenzy of flashing cameras and shouted questions. Her public downfall was as swift and brutal as the corporate tactics she had so often employed. The chairman of the board, looking pale and shaken, immediately declared the motion to remove Damon null and void. At that exact moment, as his sister was being led away in disgrace, the boardroom doors opened one more time. The chaos quieted for a beat. Alara walked in, her head held high. She was not the defeated woman from the tabloid photos. She was radiant with a quiet strength. By her side, holding her hands, were Leo and Luna. They walked through the sea of shocked faces, their eyes fixed only on their father. They walked directly to the front of the room, to the stage where Damon stood. He knelt, opening his arms. The children, who had been stolen from him before they were even born, ran into his embrace. He wrapped his arms around them, holding them tight, burying his face in their hair as 15 years of stolen time came flooding back in a wave of overwhelming emotion. Alara came and stood behind them, placing a hand on his shoulder. The four of them stood there, a family, united at last in the wreckage of the lies that had kept them apart. The cameras flashed, but the image they captured was not one of scandal or corporate intrigue. It was a portrait of redemption. The story was no longer about a CEO's fall from grace, but about a father who had torn down an empire to reclaim his family. 9 months later, the world was a different place. The manicured lawns and cold marble halls of the Blackwood estate were a distant memory. The new world was a small, sun-drenched house with a sprawling, unruly garden and a slightly crooked picket fence. Here, the sound of birdsong had replaced the incessant ringing of stock tickers, and the smell of fresh soil had replaced the sterile air of a corporate high-rise. Damon Blackwood, dressed in faded jeans and a t-shirt smudged with dirt, was on his knees, laughing as he showed his son, Leo, how to properly plant a tomato seedling. Damon was a changed man. The hard, cold edges had been worn away, replaced by a warmth and patience he never knew he possessed. The haunted look in his eyes was gone, replaced by the easy contentment of a man who had finally found his purpose. He had stepped down as CEO of Blackwood Enterprises in the weeks following Victoria's arrest, handing the reins to a trusted successor. His sister's trial had been swift, the evidence against her and Isabella overwhelming. They were now serving long sentences in a federal prison, their names forever synonymous with disgrace. Damon had sold his penthouse, his fleet of cars, his private jet. He had kept only what he needed to build this new life. His true work now was the foundation he had established in his mother's name, but which everyone knew was for his true inspiration. The Alara Foundation. With a significant portion of his fortune, he had created a powerful nonprofit dedicated to providing legal aid, financial support, and housing for single mothers who had been manipulated or disenfranchised by powerful systems. It was his penance, his attempt to right the cosmic scales his own family had so violently tipped. It was his new legacy, one built not on profit margins, but on justice and compassion. Luna ran out of the house, holding a wriggling earthworm triumphantly in her hands. "Look, Dad, he's a wiggly one," she shouted with glee. Damon chuckled, taking the worm from her gently and placing it back in the soil. "He has work to do in our garden, sweetie," he said, ruffling her hair. From the porch, Alara watched them, a soft, genuine smile on her face. She held a glass of lemonade, her contentment a palpable presence. Their journey had been a trial by fire, but the bonds forged in that crucible were unbreakable. Damon stood up, brushing the dirt from his jeans, and walked over to her. He sat on the porch swing beside her, taking her hand in his. It felt as natural as breathing. "It's a good day," she said softly, leaning her head on his shoulder. "They're all good days, with you," he replied. He reached into his pocket. He didn't pull out a velvet box with a multi-carat diamond. He pulled out a small, simple silver ring tarnished with age. It was the ring he had bought her with his last $20 all those years ago. The one he had kept in his memory box like a secret prayer. He got down on one knee, right there on the worn wooden planks of the porch. "Alara," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "I wasted 15 years trying to build an empire of glass and steel. But the only thing that was ever real, the only thing that ever mattered, was you." And them he gestured to the children who were now engaged in a serious debate over the proper spacing of carats. "I can't get that time back, but I can promise you all of my tomorrows. Let's start over. The right way this time. Marry me." Tears welled in Alara's eyes, but they were tears of joy, washing away the last vestiges of old pain. She looked at the simple ring, a symbol not of wealth or status, but of a love that had, against all odds, survived. She reached out and touched his face. "We already have," she whispered, her voice full of love and forgiveness. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Leo and Luna, sensing the moment, abandoned their gardening and ran to them, throwing their arms around them both in a big, messy, perfect hug. Damon held them all close, his family, his entire world. He had once believed his legacy would be written in the stock market pages and the skylines of cities. But he knew now, with absolute certainty, that true legacy was not something you built, but something you loved. It was the feeling of his son's head on his shoulder, his daughter's laugh in the air, and Alara's hand in his.